In this section, we're going to take a look at regression and classification. Multiple things to look at: loading structured data for classification, pre-processing data to make it usable, classification, accuracy, and then the confusion matrix, loading structured data for regression, and then finally regression, error, and evaluation of models to see how good they really are. We'll take a look at a potential answer to the last assignment. We'll start off by importing Torch, and we're going to do some iteration. We're going to go through multiple parameter values in order to see what works. We'll have our random inputs or outputs, and we'll have some learning steps here. This is just a buffer so I can keep track of what we did. Now for my particular answer, here's my trick. For a number of parameters in range 256, step by 1, -1 in each one, so we're going to count down the number of parameters on each step. I actually create the model we did from our last video, and instead of having 256 hard-coded, I just put in number of parameters, and I loop over this right here. And I'll actually go ahead and learn and loop the range. And the only difference I'm really doing is I'm taking a look at the number of learning steps. So you can see down here on line 61, I look at the number of parameters, and then I see how many steps it took to learn. And so I can actually fiddle with the number of parameters and see what the minimum is. In this video, let's take a look at loading structured data for classification. We're going to go ahead and grab some data. In this case, the mushroom data set from Kaggle. We're going to load it as a CSV data set. We'll take a look at inputs or outputs, and then a training and test loop. Mushrooms. So classification is probably the core machine learning application. Taking a set of observed data, and then with labeled samples, building a program that can classify a previously unseen sample. For this exercise, we're going to be classifying mushrooms and whether they're likely poisonous or likely edible. This is actually a fairly classic machine learning classification problem that you'll see as a sample in many locations. Now first we're going to need to load up that data set, and Pandas is actually a great tool in order to load CSV data, and we're going to use that here. So we're going to import Torch, we're going to import Pandas, and we're actually going to have a Torch data set or model here. So the mushroom data set actually just delegates off to Pandas read CSV to the mushroom CSV file, which is checked in the repository here. Now, in order to build a data set, there's really only two methods you need to implement: len and getItem. Len just tells you how much data there is, and getItem picks a single item out. Now, you need to know about Pandas. iloc gets at a value by index, which is the index we're passing, and then we're actually going to slice out the individual sample. Let's go ahead and run this here. So you can see that we have the mushroom data set. We have 8,124 samples, and the output is the class P. So we actually get the poisonous in this case. Now we have some clearly identifiable properties, but we also have to get this all into one data set. So we're going to need to separate the inputs from the outputs, and that's going to be the next iteration we do on the mushroom data set here. You can see this is really the same. We read the CSV, we have the length, but and actually the tensors down here in the getItem, we're actually going to pull out an index, and we're actually going to split this into two parts, a tuple. So you can see on the left-hand side, 1 on is actually the inputs. These are the values that we know about a particular mushroom. And on the right-hand side, we're going to actually slice out the individual value that is whether it's poisonous or not. So this tuple, which is an input-output pairing, is actually going to be something we use to drive our learning. Let's go ahead and run that code, and we'll take a peek at what we see as the very first sample, or shroom 0, in our code data set right now. Give this a run, and there you can see there's a large number of different named attributes in a named tuple, and then finally there's a class P. So you have all these letter values, and that's going to be the next thing we need to do is we have to turn these into numbers. But before we do that, there's one more thing to think about: testing and training data. So we need a set of data samples that we don't use in training to avoid the overfitting problem we talked about before. Now the good news is there's a built-in capability in PyTorch that's called random split. We take our shrooms data set, we say how many we want for training and how many we want for testing. In this case, I'm actually just going to take 5%, and we'll split that up. And we'll actually get a length 406 testing items when the remainder 7,718 training items. And we'll take a look at one of those samples. So this actually is a data set that's ready to start turning into numbers.